Alright, so La-Mulana 2. I should probably preface the video by saying I'm a bit of a heathen because I never actually played the first La-Mulana, but I know what it's about. If you don't know what La-Mulana is, it is a Metroidvania in the vein of a lot of Metroidvania games with a bit of a unique spin in that it is mostly focused on exploration and puzzle solving rather than combat. There is a lot of combat, as you're probably seeing in the background right now, but that's not really the main point of the game. Instead, you are an archaeologist, and you can probably see where some of the, we'll say, inspirations lie due to the fact that you have a rather nice tan hat and a whip. But yeah, you're a sort of adventure archaeologist exploring the ruins of La-Mulana, or in this case, in the sequel's case, a sort of mirrored penal colony version of La-Mulana called Egglana, I believe is how it's pronounced, which is a sort of worse off version of the original dungeon. And you're sort of meant to delve farther and relinquish the mysteries of the place by, well, doing it at your own pace is sort of the whole tagline of the game, because it has a very non-linear exploration to it. And this is going to be really interesting to some people and really, really frustrating to others, because the exploration is actually so non-linear that you're almost given no direction whatsoever. After the first dungeon, which you are, well, the first zone of the dungeon, which is always the same, you can open up several areas to explore at your own leisure, and the game just sort of takes a nap at that point and lets you do whatever you want. Which is a bit odd, because if you're used to the sort of very classic Metroidvania way of doing things, we're talking about like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, the game that sort of codified the way the sort of Metroidvania description, the game that actually basically invented that term. You're generally given a sort of thread, the sort of main thread that you're meant to follow, and then a whole bunch of side areas that you can explore if you want, that are generally more difficult, and you're meant to go down those areas if you want to, until you can't anymore, until you either encounter enemies that are so difficult that you couldn't possibly get through them all, and even then you usually will try by simply not fighting them and seeing if you can, jump your way around them, usually save and then try to not fight them and just run as far as you can until you die. Or you will encounter some sort of obstacle that is just requires a sort of movement ability that you don't have yet, like double jump or a grate or a gate that you cannot pass through because it requires some sort of key or ability that you don't yet possess. And you just go through these side areas for as long as you can, trying to find some sort of loot or treasure or some sort of optional ability that might make the main thread easier once you go back there. And that's the general way that games like this work. But imagine, if you will, if the main thread didn't exist, and the entire game's progression was based around these side areas and just exploring them as far as you can until you hit walls that force you to turn back and explore other side areas. That's kind of what La-Mulana 2 is like. After the initial first area, that main thread basically vanishes entirely. You have goals to actually pursue, but they're very far off goals and almost lost in the sort of general lore. And you're just sort of given free rein to do whatever. And you are meant to explore all of the open areas that you have, which will often open more areas before you actually finish those open areas. And it can almost be a little bit frustrating at first because you don't really get the satisfaction of finishing an area and knowing that you're done there and you don't really need to go back for now until you find something that lets you finish the rest of the optional content there. You just sort of wonder. You're wandering around trying to solve a lot of puzzles. I think it's actually kind of interesting because I like to solve the puzzles. I like to read all these various tablets and trying to figure out what they're talking about and what they mean, and try and remember all of the various mechanisms and traps and things that I can't pass yet, and then note them down in my brain for when I actually get the item that actually lets me pass them safely later. But I think for some people that's going to drive them absolutely insane because you don't really have a direct path that you're meant to follow. So once you run out of optional paths to go. You don't have that one that you can go back to. You just have to wander somewhere else until you actually find what you're meant to be doing. And that's another interesting point. What you're meant to be doing is basically fighting bosses, because the bosses are often hiding those important items that let you progress further somewhere else. The bosses are called guardians in this case. Although there are also mini bosses in various places. I'll show you a very short clip of one in just a second because she killed the crap out of me. But there's also the guardians, and the interesting thing about the guardians is, just like everything else in this game, they're also puzzles, because you don't just walk to the boss room to fight the boss. Oh no, you have to actually solve a puzzle to get the boss to appear in the first place. The bosses are hidden in what's called an ankh, which, as you would expect, is an ankh in the ground. And you have to actually solve a sort of zone-wide puzzle that is, generally speaking, a sort of, as you can tell there are instant death traps, by the way, so watch out for those. It's a sort of zone-wide puzzle that it persists through the entire level. And you have to do something. Usually it involves several NPCs and a lot of traps and dying and frustration in order to actually get this ankh to appear, and then you can walk up to it and fight the boss. So it's not really trying to get to a specific room in the dungeon, it's actually trying to figure out how to get the boss to show up first so you can fight it, which is kind of a neat way to do things. I'm not used to that. Generally bosses they're just there. You can just find them and then you fight them. But no, usually you can actually find the boss room very early on, but it will be empty. And as you can see here, you'll often find death traps and puzzles and things, and it is very satisfying to finally figure them out and solve them. I walked into this room and died immediately, and then I just sort of took a minute to figure out what it wanted, and then once I figured it out and looked at what I had in my inventory to actually, solve what the room had set out in front of me, it was actually kind of satisfying to figure it out. And your reward is some sort of item that will allow you to either make some other part of the dungeon more convenient for you, or maybe even progress farther elsewhere. In this case, it was the totem pole, which is an item that allows you to light up fast travel points that you normally can't, basically. There is a fast travel system using the Holy Grail, so I guess that's what the Holy Grail does. And, yeah, it's a bit strange, but that's what the totem pole does. This is a sort of a mini-boss. This is Ishtab, who is a Mayan goddess, I believe. There's a ton of different mythologies and things like that in this game, which is pretty cool, actually. I mean, that's very, Castlevania, which is often a deliberate mishmash of all sorts of mythologies from around the world. And, yeah, I failed miserably during this fight. As you can see, it lasted about 40 seconds. I eventually did beat her to continue on, which you have to do in order to fight this. So there is the ankh for this area, and that will summon the Guardian. You also have to have an ankh jewel, by the way. Think of that as a boss key that allows you to release the boss from the ankh itself, unseal it. And here we go. This is actually the boss of this area, but it takes several items from other areas in order to safely fight it, like this boat, for instance. If you don't have the boat, you will die instantly if you release the boss. And you gotta figure out where you find that boat and how to get it. So the bosses are, well, the Guardian bosses are a very large, sort of cooperative effort from you and several other NPCs in order to figure out how to safely face them, which is kind of interesting. I find that to be a neat way to do the bosses, because they are, after all, supposed to be these huge, godlike guardians of these areas, so it should be a large effort to undertake rather than just a dude in a room. So it's neat that they do it that way. In this case, it is Kujata, is always how I've pronounced that, which is a Hindu, I think, god or being that is a bull with a volcano on its back. That's kind of crazy. And I did fail my first attempt. This is my very first attempt at ever fighting it, and it's pretty obvious what you have to do. The Guardians are somewhat of a puzzle boss, as you would expect from this game, because everything is a puzzle. But they're also fairly intuitive. You usually can figure out what to do pretty easily. They're often only vulnerable in very specific points, but the points are pretty obvious. This one has big giant eyes that open up and shoot at you. Obviously, you need to hit the eyes. But The bosses are definitely very fun and a highlight of the game, I would say. Although there are a couple of mini-bosses that I don't quite understand why they're there, because they do almost nothing and die very quickly. But so far, of the 3 Guardians I've fought, all of them have been really interesting and a lot of fun to actually face. So I'd say only the mini-bosses seem to have that problem of being kind of, why are they even there? But I will say one problem I had with the game, the controls felt kind of stiff. Your jump is odd. When you jump, if you're holding a direction at the same time that you jump, like if you're running and you jump, you will continue to move in that direction in a really, intuitive way. But if you jump and then hold a direction in midair, like to say jump from a platform to another platform, you will not move in the air except for at the top of the arc of your jump, which feels very stiff and odd, because I'm used to games like, say, Hollow Knight, another really excellent Metroidvania, where your air control and just the general controls are really, really just sublime and feel really great. So this one has a little bit of that, I suppose, really old school kind of stiff feel to its controls. They don't feel bad, and I died horribly there. They just feel kind of stiff. That's something to get used to. You can tell they're not bad because after I've put about 16 hours into this game, I've finally gotten used to them, and it's not really a problem anymore. So that's the difference, I suppose, between stiff controls and bad controls, because bad controls you can't get used to because they suck. But it will probably be something that if you're not used to this type of control, then it might take a little bit of playtime to fully kind of not suck with it. But there's that boss dead. And you get a very, very useful item that you need for several areas, as I figured out that I finally got in this. The Jed Pillar, I think it's called, which is a sort of magical incantation item. Also, the boat disappears and lets you fall. Thanks, boat. But yeah, this is La-Mulana 2. It is available right now on Steam for $25, which is a pretty good price considering the amount of content on offer here, I think, because it is really, really long. And it's a very fully featured, quite lengthy Metroidvania with a lot of puzzles and a lot of exploration. So if that's your thing, and also if particularly difficult games in the genre are your thing with a ton of puzzles and things to solve, then yeah, check it out. And also if you liked the first game, because it is more of that, but from what I've heard, with a little bit more combat focus. Then do check it out. The link will be in the description below this video for you to have a look at it, and yeah, you can check there and see for yourself. I think it's really good, actually. Also, you have a tablet with apps, which kind of clashes with the dungeon, but that's because you're not actually in a medieval setting, it's just an ancient dungeon. So that's interesting. But yeah, do check it out if you enjoy this kind of thing. I know I do, and I've been having a ton of fun with it after I passed that initial frustration barrier of getting used to the controls. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.